So one of the questions that has been posed to me is there a way to trace a path around an object or a shape within wire? And I told the person that it's not easily, there's no real way. There are like a couple ways that I can think of that you could do. You could emulate that kind of appearance that it is being traced out. And I've put those two in this little recording to kind of discuss those ideas. One thing that you could do is you could take, like, for instance, I have this chevron, right? And what I'm doing is I have this edge that's already been created, and I'm sticking it into a mask. The mask on the opposite side of this mask is a gradient that is being revealed by a threshold. So to give you an example, when you go here, texture from data, you'll notice that here is the gradient. It's just a minimum to maximum set in a linear. And what that does is just basically allows me to change the color if I so choose to. If I wanted to go opposite, if I wanted to go backwards, I wanted to go from white to black instead of black to white, I have that option. But what I would do is I would basically have that set up in texture from data. I'd have a gradient. Here is my angular gradient that I'm using. And what I would do is I would just basically reveal the parts that I want to be shown. So I would take my threshold and I would just do that. You probably would want to have a final output to be completely white in this scene. But to give you an example as to what that looks like, here it is revealed, and when I push this button or when I slide this slider across, it reappears as if it was being traced out. Now, one of the things that you may notice with this, if a man on a fast horse wouldn't know the difference, it's an old saying that a friend of mine used to say all the time. I used to work in the sign business. And when we work in the sign business, one of the things is you're glimpsing at something for 30 seconds and you're never going to see the little imperfections of those things. But those who know will see those things. So, for instance, right here, you can see that there's a bit of an angle at that sharp edge. If this edge was smaller, you really wouldn't be able to see it. But the bigger the angle is, or the bigger the edge is, the more you're going to see of that. So when you're tracing it out, you'll notice that there is this kind of like, it's not quite, but really in most cases, you're not going to see it if it's just being at a certain speed, right? You're not going to pay attention to that. But there are people like us who see those things, and we may or may not want that to show up. Enter in the second idea. The second idea is that you basically create a path. So there's a couple ways you could do that. I've taken a circle pattern, and what I've done is I've basically narrowed it down to three pieces. And the reason being is because that will give me the XY coordinates for three circles. And that's basically what I have here. These three circles have these float 2s, which is the X and Y coordinates. I'm taking those and rotating them 0.85 to be in this frame or this section. So if I rotate this around, you'll see that I'll get different places that I could rotate that, right? I can set it up so that the triangle is with the top pointing down, right? So the reason why I would do this is because then what I could do is I could split those three channels into their own floats, then take those three channels and put them into linears. And basically what I'm doing is I'm basically going from the minimum to the maximum, which is basically saying from the minimum to the maximum, from the minimum to the maximum, from the minimum to the maximum. And then basically count 10 frames in between, or 10 floats, or 10 float 2s in between each one. And when you do that, you get this. So now you're kind of getting an idea as to how this would work. Basically, I have this set up here where I basically have a set of circles. Great, Jake, you have a great bunch of circles. Great. Why would you do that? Well, if I were to take a shape renderer and change out the linear for instead of black using transparent, which you basically just choose the alpha channel and just slide it all the way to the left, you could set it as an alpha channel, and now you have this dancing marquee dots. Which, great, but this is not a line, Jake. How do you fix it? How do you make it a line? Well, you just add in a few more nodes in between your linear. And when you do that, you get this. So now you're getting this more kind of line kind of look. There are ways that you could expand this so that there's just one line. Case in point, we're at 120 basically circles, right? 120 instances of that shape. So what we would need to do is type in 120 here, and then here we could do the same thing. We just type in 120, and now you just have one line that's going all the way around. It should be in the saw, and the reason why is my saw oscillator is only set to 30, so it only goes 30 frames or 30 key instances, so we need to change that to 120, and now you have a solid line. It's disappearing, or it's creating the gradient in between the two linear colors, and which turn is what's causing that look, that object. So basically what you would need to do, the short of it, is you would need to, instead of setting an expand, you would just basically take a you could take a linear, you could take another linear and join them together. So if I take this one out and then I just join the two pieces together, and so now I have two basically 120. Let's change that. So the whole thing is 120, so we're going to change this to 60, change this one to 60. Okay, and so now we have two, lucky us. But what I can do is I could just basically take this one out, make it transparent. So now I have one that's shorter. How could I make it shorter? Well, just add one to the other more. So we could set this to like 10, so it's a gradient of 10, right? And then add the rest of it to the bottom number, right? So the total needs to be 120, so 120 minus 10 is 110, right? And so now we have this small object that is following a path. So that's the short version of how that all goes together. The problem with this, there's quite a few little problems. One is you could also expand it out so that it basically is like a line, right, to go in a direction. And that works. There are a couple issues with this. One of them is you're basically using a transform. You're basically taking all these nodes and you're creating this kind of marquee kind of look, or this bouncing object, which is great. It does work. There are some issues with well, you'll run into them. The biggest thing is the bigger your path, the more path you have, the more you have to set up. You may need to think about how you're going to set up that path. Here, I'm actually doing this through a circle pattern, right? Technically, what I could do, I could take out this whole mess here, right? And I'll show you why. So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to drag it here. Okay, so now we're just talking the 3. What we could do is set this to 120, and so now we have a full circle, right? And so now I get that going around in a circle. But the problem with this is that you basically have to set up its path, right? And then you basically have to set up the circles, and then once you have the circles set up, then you have to basically tell it how big your object is going to be and when it's moving. You'll also notice that there's rounded edges here, right? Technically, you could put a square in. However, the biggest issue with that is you're going to have to rotate the square every time you make a turn. If you're at 45-degree angles, you're not going to notice it. But anything larger than a 45-degree angle turn, or 90-degree turn, you are going to notice it. I'll give you a case point, right? So if we take a rectangle, not that rectangle, let's try a different one, a rectangle. I can just take the shape here, and we're just going to put 0.025 like we did with the other one, 0.25, and 0.025, and oops, 1 0 missing there. Okay, and so now I have this triangle. It's kind of small. Let's move this to 0.55 just to kind of illustrate a point. 0.55 and 0.55. And so now we have this, and now if I, basically connect my lines to that, this is what the circle looks like. So you could smooth it if you made the lines, if you made the squares big, or the amount of squares, you'd have to double that most likely. But this is what that shape looks like. So now you have these edges that are showing up. When it turns a corner, there's a sharp kind of 45-degree angle right there and there. So you can see it as it goes around. Not as smooth as the circle. But if it's smaller, you're not going to typically notice those things. And in that case, you might as well just use a circle because you're never going to see the edges, right? So that's pretty much it. Hopefully that was helpful. I hope that, gives you kind of a food for thought or some ideas. If I change this to 40 and then I change this one to 90, is that 120? No, that's more than 120. This would need to be 80, which would be 120. So now I have a bigger circle, right? So, yeah. So play around with it. Let me know what you guys think. And you'll notice that the circle is going the opposite direction. Like maybe I don't want that side to be the invisible side, right? I want it to go the other way. So what I would do is I would just basically go this way. There. So now it's going around in the right path, right? But there may be instances where you want it to be going the opposite direction, right? So let's go back to that. So if I do this, how do I get it to go the opposite direction? Just put a negative number on there. And it'll go the opposite direction. And the saw oscillator is the one that will make that happen. All right. Well, hopefully that was informative. If you guys have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, let me know. I am very interested. I'm highly motivated to be the wire patch guy. I really like this program. It does a lot of great things, and I think that I'd like to be the person to help out. So yeah, give me a contact. My email address is Jacob, Jacob, Mesick, Mesick @gmail.com. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you guys next time.